Love, in its most exalted form, is often sung as freedom, surrender, and fusion of souls. But what if all of this were nothing more than an ingeniously constructed illusion? For Nietzsche, love is rarely innocent. It is, above all, a power game, an invisible chain that binds human beings under the disguise of devotion. The philosopher distrusted great passions precisely because he saw in them the danger of servitude. The individual who abdicates himself to be accepted, desired, or validated by another. What we call surrender may actually be the most sophisticated form of emotional slavery. And you? Have you ever wondered if in the name of love you stopped living your own life? If you shaped your way of being, speaking, and even dreaming just to please someone? Nietzsche didn't write to comfort, but to awaken. This is an invitation to face the dark and liberating side of reflection on love. If these provocations stir your mind, subscribe and follow this journey. Nietzsche believed that behind all our actions there exists an invisible engine, the will to power. This force is not just desire to dominate others, but a vital affirmation, an expansion of one's own energy to live. When we look at love through this lens, it ceases to be a pure and elevated feeling, to reveal itself as a disguised battlefield. Love is many times the arena where two wills to power meet and mask themselves with sweet words, caring gestures, and promises of eternity. Think about how many times someone declares, "I want nothing in return, just to love you." The phrase sounds noble, but Nietzsche would teach us to distrust it. Who really loves without expecting return? Who manages to give themselves without desiring even secretly recognition, security, companionship, or at minimum gratitude? The idea of disinterested love is, for Nietzsche, a myth. Behind each passionate gesture hides a search for expansion, for emotional territory, for influence over another's life. This mask of surrender makes love even more seductive. It presents itself as gift, but harbors within the hidden demand to be reciprocated, to be remembered, to be indispensable. The lover desires to occupy a central place in the beloved's universe, desires that the other mold their life around them. And when this happens, love becomes a refined form of slavery because the relationship ceases to be encounter to transform into possession. Nietzsche perceived that human beings create illusions to endure life. Love is one of these most sophisticated illusions because it gives meaning to loneliness and creates the sensation of transcendence. But at the same time, it reinforces one of the greatest traps, believing that we need another to be complete. Thus, the will to power disguises itself as tenderness. The desire to dominate hides behind the desire to care. And the more someone affirms they love without limits, the greater the chain they cast over the other. Imagine a person who says, "I would do anything for you." At first glance, this declaration sounds like absolute devotion, but Nietzsche would make us ask, and where is this individual's own life? Where are their desires, their potency, their singularity? By transforming into a servant of love, they stop being a creator of themselves to be merely a shadow reflected in another's gaze. The will to power, which should affirm life, is diverted to emotional control. In daily life, we see this in relationships marked by silent sacrifices, people who abandon dreams, change cities, renounce friendships, mold their own identity just to maintain a loving bond. And all this is justified in the name of love. But looking deeper, we realize that love served as veneer for the true dynamic, the struggle for power and belonging. Nietzsche doesn't condemn love completely, but alerts us about its double face. It can be a source of vitality, but it can also be a mechanism of enslavement. When we believe that another is our reason for existing, we place our freedom in their hands. And in that moment, We stop being masters of ourselves. Love, then, fulfills an ambiguous role. It offers warmth and meaning, but charges the price of submission. By revealing love as a mask of the will to power, Nietzsche invites us to face our own illusions. We love because we want to expand our being, but at the same time, we use the other as mirror, as instrument, as anchor. This is love's tragic tension. What we call giving is, many times, just the most subtle form of taking possession. Perhaps the great Nietzschean provocation is this: to what extent is your love an affirmation of life, and to what extent is it just the masked expression of the desire to control and be controlled? Romantic love is perhaps one of the greatest illusions ever invented by culture. It wasn't born with human nature, but was molded by centuries of poetry, religion, and social conventions. Nietzsche, distrustful of universal truths, wouldn't have hesitated to see romanticism as a beautiful gilded prison. Love, in this mold, is not just a spontaneous feeling. It is a script, a performance. We were taught that to love is to lose oneself in another, that soulmates exist, that true love is eternal, and that anything different from this is a failure, a defeat, or an incomplete experience. This idealization works as a silent trap because it makes us seek something that perhaps never existed. How many people spend their lives waiting for the perfect match, the definitive encounter, the one who will fill all voids? This waiting creates frustration and dependence, and when we finally find someone who seems to correspond to the dream, we project onto this person a role they never asked to play. We don't love the other as they are, but as we want them to be. Nietzsche would see in this process a serious deviation from authentic life. We trade reality for a myth. Think about the logic of fairy tales that marked generations. Princes and princesses destined for each other, eternal love vows, happy endings as if life were a static painting. This romantic vision not only distorts reality, but also imprisons the loving experience in an impossible mold. Love, in its living and pulsing form, is made of changes, conflicts, imperfections, and many times ruptures. But romanticism insists on fixing love as an untouchable statue. Thus, instead of dealing with the real flow of relationships, we cling to a fantasy that crushes us. Nietzsche would call this herd morality applied to love. Romantic culture offers us a standard and demands that everyone follow it, without space for deviations. The result is a multitude of individuals who live similar lives, repeating phrases, rituals, and inherited expectations. How many times have you heard or said, "You are everything to me. Without you, I am nothing"? These expressions, apparently beautiful, are symptoms of a manufactured dependence, of an ideal that prevents us from living the singularity of each encounter. In daily life, romantic idealization appears in small attitudes. Someone expects constant messages to feel loved, demands proof of eternal fidelity, creates the fantasy that the partner should guess their desires and needs. These demands don't come from love itself, but from the cultural model that taught us that loving is like this. Nietzsche, in his critique of collective illusions, would see in this a dangerous deviation. We are not loving, we are acting within an inherited script. This trap becomes even more cruel because it makes us feel guilt. When reality doesn't correspond to the romantic ideal, we think the problem is in us, that we failed to love in the correct way, that we weren't enough. Few realize that the failure is actually in the unreal model we try to follow. Nietzsche, who so criticized imposed morals, would provoke us to break this pattern, to destroy the statue of ideal love, to allow life to express itself in its truth, however chaotic and imperfect it may be. There's an important detail. Romanticism not only imprisons the individual, but also serves as an instrument of social control. Arranged marriages, expectations of eternal fidelity, rigid gender roles, everything was justified in the name of love's idealization. What seems to be emotional freedom is, many times, just disguised discipline. Romantic love demands obedience, remaining together until death do us part, ignoring individual desires, repressing impulses, sacrificing one's own authenticity to maintain the illusion of perfection. Thus, love ceases to be encounter and becomes contract. Nietzsche would say that love's idealization is a form of resentment. Instead of living life in its intensity, people take refuge in dreams, hopes, and impossible promises. Romanticism, in this sense, works as opium. It numbs, calms, creates comfort, but prevents confrontation with naked reality. And the reality is that love is unstable, transitory, and always marked by tension between freedom and dependence. Instead of accepting this truth, we prefer to believe in fairy tales that protect us from the anguish of impermanence. But the Nietzschean provocation doesn't end in criticism. It invites us to ask, what if love were lived without the weight of idealization? What if, instead of waiting for the great love of life, we experienced each encounter as unique without the obligation of eternity? This wouldn't mean despising the bond, but freeing it from the chains of fantasy. Love could then be lighter, truer, closer to the life that Nietzsche so defended, a creative, imperfect life in constant transformation. Deep down, romanticism's trap takes us away from ourselves. By seeking an ideal, we forget to live the real. Nietzsche would call us back to earth, to concrete experience, to relationships that don't need external justification. Perhaps the real challenge is this: learning to love without idealizing, accepting the other as they are, accepting ourselves as we are, and building a love that doesn't promise eternity, but that is intense while it lasts. Thus, love ceases to be gilded prison and becomes an experience of potency. No longer slavery to myth, but free creation between two forces that meet. Romantic love, with its promise of perfection, may sound beautiful, but beauty that imprisons is just another form of decadence. Nietzsche invites us to tear down this idol and in its place raise a more human, more real, and therefore more alive love. To love, for many, is synonymous with sacrifice. From early on, we learn that the proof of true love lies in the capacity to give up oneself for another. This vision, cultivated by centuries of religious morality and repeated in songs and stories, transformed love into a field of renunciation. But Nietzsche, always distrustful of everything that demands submission, would invite us to look at this sacrifice with critical eyes. To what extent is giving oneself really love, and to what extent is it a form of self-annihilation? How many times have we heard phrases like, "I change for you, I do anything to please you, my happiness is in seeing you happy"? Apparently, these words carry nobility, but Nietzsche would see in them the symptom of a life that renounces its own potency. The individual stops being a creator of themselves to become a reflection of another's will. They no longer live to affirm their singularity, but to serve as shadow, as someone else's extension. This process, disguised as love, is actually a form of emotional slavery. In daily life, we see this clearly in relationships where one adapts entirely to another. There are those who abandon careers, friends, hobbies, convictions, everything in the name of preserving the loving bond. Over time, these people no longer know who they are outside the relationship. They become dependent, not just emotionally, but existentially. Their identity dissolves. It's as if they said, "I exist because I love." Nietzsche, defender of a strong and affirmative life, would call this decadence. To love shouldn't be suicide of individuality. Sacrifice of self is usually celebrated, especially in religious contexts. The idea of giving one's life for another is seen as supreme virtue. But Nietzsche denounced this morality of renunciation as dangerous. It transforms weakness into virtue and submission into glory. By abdicating oneself, the individual not only loses their strength, but reinforces a culture that values obedience instead of creation. In love's field, this means that the more someone erases themselves, the more they are seen as an example of surrender. And the more they are exalted, the more they distance themselves from themselves. This dynamic also generates resentment. Those who sacrifice themselves excessively, sooner or later, present the bill. How many times have we not heard, "After everything I did for you, this is how you treat me"? Love, which should be encounter, transforms into debt. The other becomes prisoner of what they received. Each gesture, each renunciation, each favor is registered as currency of exchange. The sacrifice of self, then, reveals its cruel face. It wasn't generosity, but investment in power disguised as goodness. Nietzsche would alert that this type of love doesn't strengthen anyone. The sacrificed lover weakens by renouncing themselves. The beloved weakens by carrying the guilt of sustaining the weight of a life that isn't theirs. The result is a relationship marked by dependence, resentment, and, many times, mutual destruction. There is no creation, no expansion, no affirmation of life, just wear and imprisonment. It's important to differentiate genuine care from corrosive sacrifice. To care is to share forces. To sacrifice oneself is to abdicate them. In the first case, there is vitality. Two people grow together, inspire each other, expand horizons. In the second, there is impoverishment. One lives at the cost of another, and both end up stagnated. Nietzsche would call this second model decadent love, typical of a morality that exalts life's negation. A daily example can illustrate well. Imagine someone in love who, to not lose their partner, abandons their professional dreams. At first it seems like a noble gesture, but over time frustration grows, vital energy is exhausted, and love becomes burden. What began as devotion transforms into prison. This scenario is common because we were taught to believe that love demands total sacrifice. But Nietzsche would say, love that asks for your annulment is not love, it is slavery. In his philosophy, authentic life is one that expands, that creates, that affirms itself. To love, in this sense, should be an encounter that strengthens singularity, not one that erases it. The challenge is learning to remain whole within the relationship without losing axis, without dissolving. This requires courage. The courage to say no, to preserve one's own spaces, to continue being creator of oneself. Nietzsche would remind us that true love is not fusion, but creative tension. It is the encounter of two forces that affirm themselves, not the submission of one to another. Sacrifice may seem like proof of love, but actually, it is just the confession that someone gave up living fully. The question he would leave us echoing is this: when loving, are you expanding your life or just disappearing inside another's life? Nietzsche believed that love, many times, is nothing more than a refined exercise of power. And perhaps there is no clearer expression of this than jealousy. Jealousy is presented as proof of affection, as if it were natural to want to watch, control, and demand exclusivity. But beyond romantic justifications, it reveals love's most tyrannical side, the attempt to transform the other into property. From early on, we learn to normalize phrases like, "You are mine," "I am only yours," "No one will take you from me." They sound affectionate, but Nietzsche would hear them as confessions of domination. Love, under this discourse, ceases to be encounter between two free beings and transforms into a contract of possession. It's as if the beloved were territory to be defended, conquered land that cannot be invaded by anyone. Thus, love doesn't feed on freedom, but on vigilance and control. Jealousy, in this sense, is a mask of insecurity and will to power. The individual cannot bear the idea that the other might have their own desires, autonomous relationships, paths that don't include them. The mere possibility of losing the center of attention becomes unbearable. Behind jealousy crises, there is a demand. Renounce your freedom so I feel safe. And this demand, when accepted, converts love into prison. In daily life, this manifests in small gestures that seem innocent. A partner who demands social media passwords, another who takes offense at any friendship with the opposite sex, someone who transforms each solo outing into cause for conflict. These behaviors many times are justified as zeal, but Nietzsche would identify them as decadence. It is life reduced to fear, potency reduced to control. Those who love with jealousy don't want the other free, they want the other domesticated. Nietzsche said that human beings have difficulty dealing with others' freedom. We love another not just for what they are, but for what they can represent to us. Therefore, we try to mold them, frame them, fix them in a role that satisfies us. Jealousy is, in this process, a domestication tool. It signals that the beloved cannot expand without generating threat. The more the other grows, the more the fear of losing them increases. So, instead of celebrating this growth, we try to contain it. Love transforms thus into a game of sabotages disguised as care. Some say that feeling jealousy is inevitable, that it's part of human condition. Nietzsche, however, would invite us to distrust this naturalization. For him, what we call natural is often just cultural habit disguised as instinct. Jealousy is not just spontaneous emotion, it is also heritage of centuries in which the other, mainly women, was seen as man's possession. Romanticism, with its songs of exclusivity, only reinforced this imagery. To love became synonymous with controlling, and to be loved became synonymous with obeying. This logic of possession generates devastating effects. On one side, it creates insecure individuals, always on the verge of paranoia, incapable of trusting. On the other, it produces imprisoned individuals who need to reduce their own life to fit within their partner's demands. The result is a relationship corroded by fear and guilt, where each free gesture is seen as betrayal. In this scenario, there is no space for expansion, only for survival. Nietzsche would call this decadent love, because it doesn't come from strength, but from weakness. Strong love doesn't need to watch because it trusts in its own potency. Fragile love, on the contrary, tries to hold the other by force because it knows that without them, it collapses. Jealousy, then, is confession of impotence. It shows that the individual is not capable of living fully without dominating the other, but there is a way out. Nietzsche invites us to imagine a love that doesn't fear freedom, but celebrates it. A love that doesn't reduce itself to possession, but expands in creation. In this model, jealousy loses space because value is not in retaining, but in sharing. To love, in this sense, is to desire that the other grows, even if this growth takes them to paths different from ours. It is accepting that love is not prison, but encounter. This doesn't mean indifference, but transformation. Instead of "you are mine," we would say, "I want you to be fully yourself, and if in that being there is space for me, so be it." This posture requires courage, because it exposes us to the risk of loss. But Nietzsche would say that authentic life is only possible when we face risk head-on, without resorting to illusions of control. Love that dominates may seem safe, but is just a mask of fear. Love that liberates is risky, but is also the only form of love that strengthens. Thus, jealousy and possession reveal love's dark side, its vocation for domination. But it is precisely by facing this shadow that we can choose another path. The Nietzschean challenge is this: transforming love from battlefield into space of creation, so that loving is not reducing the other, but allowing both to grow in intensity and freedom. Nietzsche, when proposing the idea of amor fati, love of fate, wasn't speaking of idealized romanticism nor submission to another, but of a radical posture before life. To love fate means embracing existence in its totality, with its pains, failures, losses, and transformations. It is saying yes to life exactly as it is, without wishing it were different. When we bring this vision to the field of relationships, we perceive a crucial difference. While romantic love usually imprisons and demands, amor fati liberates and strengthens. Effective slavery is born from the belief that we need another to exist, that without them, life loses meaning. This dependence transforms the relationship into chain. The individual gives up their autonomy, their desires, their singularity, in exchange for emotional security. They live in the illusion that they found in someone salvation, the fixed point that will prevent life from moving. But Nietzsche would see in this not a victory, but decadence. After all, one who needs another to live is not master of themselves, but servant. Amor fati, on the contrary, is full acceptance of reality, including loneliness, impermanence, loss. It is the courage to love life without guarantees. Applied to human love, it means living the relationship as affirmation, not as escape. Loving someone not because they fill a void, but because, beside them, life intensifies. And if one day this bond ends, it is still possible to love the fact of having lived, because everything is part of the destiny we choose to say yes to. Imagine two people who meet and choose to live a relationship under the logic of amor fati. They don't promise each other eternity, don't try to control the future, don't demand that the other be salvation. Instead, each one assumes their own life as work of creation, and the encounter becomes space of potency. If the relationship lasts, it will be because it strengthens. If it ends, it will be because it fulfilled its role in that stretch of existence. In both cases, there is no resentment, but gratitude. This contrasts radically with effective slavery, where the end of a relationship is lived as ruin, as personal annihilation. How many don't say, "Without you, I cannot live"? Nietzsche would consider this a tragic error because it reveals incapacity to love life itself, independent of another. Amor fati invites us to invert this logic. First love life, then share this love with someone. Don't expect the other to be salvation, but walk together as creators. In daily life, affective slavery appears in simple behaviors. People who control every step of their partner because they cannot bear the idea of abandonment. Others who remain in abusive relationships because they believe it's better than being alone. There are still those who completely nullify themselves to maintain the bond, as if existence depended on that relationship. In all these cases, life is reduced to dependence, and love transforms into prison. Nietzsche would provoke us to break with this logic. He didn't deny the importance of relationships, but insisted that life only has value when we affirm our singularity. Amor fati is precisely the key to this, not resisting life's flow, but welcoming it. Loving someone, yes, but also loving the possibility of loss, the pain of change, inevitable loneliness. It is in this embrace of totality that freedom flourishes. By practicing amor fati in relationships, we stop demanding that the other complete us. We begin to see them as journey partner, not as savior. The bond ceases to be contract and becomes creation. Instead of imprisoning, love strengthens. And if it comes to an end, it won't be cause for resentment but recognition. It was part of the path, and the path is worthy of love in all its curves. Nietzsche would say that only a strong spirit is capable of living this way, because it requires abandoning comforting illusions. It's easier to believe in eternal loves than to face transitoriness. It's simpler to surrender to dependence than to assume responsibility for oneself. But the Nietzschean challenge is another. becoming creator of one's own life, loving destiny in its entirety, and from there, loving someone not as possession, but as sharing of strength. Deep down, the question is this: do you love another because you cannot bear being alone, or because even being able to be alone, you choose to share life? The first option is affective slavery. The second is amor fati. One is born from fear, the other from strength. And Nietzsche always invited us to choose strength. After traveling through love's shadows, its mask of power, romanticism's trap, sacrifice of self, and jealousy's tyranny, we arrive at the decisive question: is love that doesn't enslave possible? Nietzsche didn't believe in easy consolations, but believed in the force of creation. If life is flow, chaos, and impermanence, the challenge is learning to love from strength, not from lack. Love that strengthens is not that which imprisons, but that which expands. This love is born when two people don't seek in another salvation, but amplification of self. There is no promise of eternity, but there is intensity in the present. There is no fusion that erases, but encounter that potentializes. Each remains owner of themselves, and precisely because of this can share their freedom. Nietzsche would say, this is love worthy of the overman, a love that doesn't ask for submission, but feeds on the courage to be whole. In daily life, this love appears in relationships where there is space for mutual growth. One encourages another to pursue their own dreams, even if this means separate paths. There is trust in place of jealousy, sharing in place of possession, care in place of sacrifice. It is a bond where one doesn't expect the other to fill voids, but where it is recognized that both are already complete, and precisely because of this, can choose to be together. Nietzsche saw life as artwork in constant creation. Love, in this sense, should be one more artistic expression, something that doesn't repeat, that doesn't follow imposed molds, but that is created at each instant. There is no manual, no universal standard, no correct way to love. Love that strengthens is that which reinvents itself, that assumes imperfection, that transforms pain into learning and joy into celebration. Overcoming affective servitude doesn't mean abandoning love, but purifying it of its illusions. It means breaking with the idea that another is property, salvation, or justification of existence. It means transforming love into field of freedom, where presence is choice and not obligation. In this process, it is necessary to abandon fear of loss. Because only those who accept the possibility of ending can fully live the present, Nietzsche would invite us to practice what he called great health, a vitality that doesn't fear solitude, that doesn't cling to crutches, that doesn't need moorings to find meaning. Love that strengthens is born from this health. It doesn't demand fusion nor dependence. On the contrary, it flourishes in the encounter between two affirmative forces. The more whole, the more capable of sharing. The more free, the more capable of choosing to remain. Imagine a relationship where each says to another, I want you to be everything you can be, even if this leads me to lose you. This phrase, frightening for traditional love, is the essence of Nietzschean love. Because those who truly love don't fear another's freedom, they celebrate it. They don't seek to reduce, but to amplify. They don't imprison, but liberate. It is love that doesn't annul the will to power, but transforms it into joint creation. This love is rare because it requires courage, courage to lose, courage to live without guarantees, courage to face solitude. But Nietzsche would say that only the strong are prepared to love this way, and that this love is the only one capable of generating growth because it is born from abundance and not from lack. Those who love from lack enslave, those who love from plenitude strengthen. Love as servitude is the herd's rule. Love as creation is the free spirit's path. Looking back, we see that almost everything we learned about love was molded to domesticate us. idealizations, sacrifices, jealousies, contracts. But the love that Nietzsche envisioned is another. Wild, creative, dangerous, but profoundly liberating. It doesn't guarantee security, but offers intensity. It doesn't promise eternity, but gives meaning to the instant. Overcoming affective servitude doesn't happen overnight. It is a process of unlearning, of breaking chains, of assuming responsibility for oneself. But in the end, what remains is the possibility of loving in a more authentic, more human, and paradoxically, more divine way. Because those who love without demanding possession touch something of eternity in the present instant. And perhaps this is Nietzsche's great calling, learning to love not as slaves, but as creators. Not as those who lose themselves, but as those who find themselves in encounter. Love that strengthens is, above all, an exercise of courage before life. We traveled Nietzsche's journey through love's dark side, its face of power, its illusions, its sacrifices, its tyrannies. But we also discovered the possibility of a stronger, freer, more creative love. A love that doesn't enslave, but expands. And now I ask, which belief about love has imprisoned you most until today? Share your reflection in the comments and also tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to continue this philosophical journey. Thank you so much for being part of this community that seeks to think deeper, without fear of facing the hardest truths of the human soul.